Hello, and welcome to Behind the Byline.
This is Evan Blackwell, here today with co-host Jenica Hallman. Today's episode will be a little bit different. Like all our guests, today's guest discovered journalism at a young age through involvement in student publications and used it as a springboard into a successful career as a newspaper graphic designer.
But then he brought things back full circle and returned to the classroom. As the journalism teacher and publications advisor at Francis Howell Central High School in suburban St. Louis for the past 14 years, Matt Schott has provided guidance to hundreds of students that have worked for the school's award-winning yearbook, newspaper, broadcast, and online publications. That's right, yearbook, newspaper, broadcast, web. Schott advises them all and teaches journalism and photojournalism. Under his tenure, Francis Howell Central's publications have been national award winners, bringing home both CSPA Gold Crowns and NSPA Pacemakers.
Today, Jenica and I will talk to Matt about how he got started in student pubs, his career in newspapers, which included a stint as a co-worker of yours truly, why he chose to become a teacher, and the challenges of advising 4 publications at the same time. But now, let's talk to Matt Schott.
You're listening to the Walsworth Yearbooks Podcast Network.
All right. Well, Matt, once again, welcome to Behind the Byline. I really appreciate you taking a few minutes for us this afternoon. I know this is a busy time of year for advisors, and this really has to be a busy time of year for you. Tell us a little bit about, I guess just to start, give us your background, how you got into student publications, how you got interested in journalism, where you're from, the whole bit.
Well, I'm originally from the Chicago area. That's where I was born and grew up, and went to high school there. Then moved down to Missouri. I went to Truman State University over in Kirksville, and then that's where we met in St. Joseph. And after that, went back to Chicago, down to Key West, Florida, then back to Chicago, and then down here. And teaching journalism and only journalism. I would not be a good English teacher or anything else like that. Was something I'd thought about in high school and in college, but I wanted to practice with that. I had about 8 years or so in the field, and just one of my good friends from Truman, Aaron Manful, who is actually the advisor over at Howell North here in St. Charles, knew that I was looking to get into teaching and wanted to do basically the same type of thing he does. And he knew the advisor at Central did not want to do this job anymore. She was wanting to do English and pursue some other things. So that's how I wound up down here. And my wife, she was a teacher at the time in the Rockwood School District, and she's now an administrator in the Rockwood School District. And so that's how I got here. I've been at Howell Central. This is my 14th year, and pretty much if it's published at our school, I'm the one who's in charge of it.
Right. Right. Well, we're gonna get into your career there at Central, but if we can go back a little bit before then, were you involved in student publications when you were like in high school?
Yeah, I was. I was a reporter my senior year at my high school, Oak Park River Forest High School, which is just just west of Chicago, and I had a really fantastic teacher there. Guy by the name of Jeff Curry, and I had always been a good writer. I enjoyed writing. My family, we always, if you know anything about Chicago media, there's a ton of it. We always had both of their daily papers in the house, watching the news relatively frequently. So,
right.
Yeah, that was just writing was something I really enjoyed throughout high school and college, and now as well. I don't write as much as I would like to, or am able to, or I would like to be able to, but Yeah, so it was definitely something, Jeff showed me that, and I love sports. So that was sort of my thing. I covered basketball and baseball and volleyball and just things like that. And I was like, my sort of, what I tell students, I was like, somebody's going to pay me to write about sports and things I love and things like that. And pay me to go to games and things like that. That sounds like a pretty good deal. So,
Oh, I know. That used to be my life.
yeah.
Yeah. Now, did it continue at Truman State too?
Yeah. Yeah. I started on the paper there my sophomore year. Was an assistant sports editor my junior year, and then the sports editor my senior year.
Now, was it at Truman State that you started also get into a little bit more of design type stuff?
Well, we had to do that like when we were putting the paper together. So that's definitely where
Sure.
it became a part of what I knew and what I guess skills and talents I was able to pick up. And honestly, when I got to St. Joe, my initial thoughts were probably still to be in writing and reporting. And then I got there and started seeing, again, I mean, I think I'm a good writer. I don't think I was quite as good as I thought I was in hindsight. I don't think I had, just I got a couple tastes of doing it in St. Joe, and it wasn't, that's something I guess I had as much passion as I thought I did for.
Mm-hmm.
And I was always pretty solid at design at Truman. I wasn't great. And I don't know, did you know Rob Schneider?
Yeah.
I started because I was on the copy desk for the most part while I was there. And so I just started working with Rob, who was also a Truman guy, and learning a lot from him. And then he took off and they promoted me to design editor after I applied for it. Honestly, those 3 years doing that job were probably I learned so much about every aspect of publishing there because design just touches everything. Obviously you're working with writers and photographers and other designers and things like that, but other editors, working with the people higher up on the masthead, learning about how to work with editors, learning how to work with the other departments, working with advertising and classified and the folks in the back, in the print shop and in the press room and everything. I was in meetings with all of those heads of departments and working with those guys. And so, I mean, those 3 years were just this, really intense crush of learning not only the journalism side of thing, but the printing and publishing side of thing.
Right. Well, it's interesting you talking about how your love of writing, because that's the way I remembered you at St. Joe was you were the guy to go to when we needed like a really great graphics package
Right.
or a great special section
Right.
designed. I mean, I remembered you as this really great designer.
And I mean, I still love doing that, and still get, the thing I like about this job presently, or I guess the job I've had for 14 years is I still get to do all of those things. I'm not
Right.
writing, I'm teaching my students how to get better at it. I mean, I might write things here or there for other places, but I'm not writing in our publications. But I'm able to teach students to be better photographers, better graphic designers, better, whatever. We're doing podcasts and broadcasts and all that sort of stuff now. So I still get to do all those things that I was doing before, but just in a little bit of a different way.
And now I've seen some really incredible photography that you've done as well. Was that something that you were involved in student publications, or where did the photography side come in for you?
I had taken a photography class in high school, did a little bit in college, but no, it wasn't really until I needed to be able to teach it that and so it was definitely when I started, I think, the thing I was weakest at. I knew it. I knew some of the stuff, and I knew how a camera worked and everything. But it was definitely the weakest thing when it came. If you think of graphic design or writing or editing or photography, some of those sort of course things in journalism, photography was definitely the weakest, and I would probably say it's the strongest at this point. There's just something about it in the last 5 to 7 years or so where it's just really taken to me. And it's, I'm always tinkering with the camera if family or friends are asking what I want for a birthday or Christmas or something. Chances are it's something photography related. So it's kind of, I don't know, an interesting evolution.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting to see how you've been involved with journalism for so many years, but even now, your interest and skills are continuing to develop.
Yeah. And I mean, I just think that's something the field has dictated. I mean, I'm sure you guys have seen how, yearbook publishing has evolved, and there's lots of different things that, like when I started, it was a book, and I've seen, where DVDs are included, and there's all sorts of augmented reality stuff that people do now and things like that. And so I just think it's something that, I mean, I have the interest in it. So it's not, when I'm flipping through, like I use the app Flipboard to look at, lots of different stories and stuff like that. I mean, there's all sorts of journalism stuff that's coming in through there. And so it doesn't feel like work, but I think it's just something, if you want to have a program that's reflective of what the media is doing, you need to have an interest, and you need to be able to know those things so that you can communicate those to your students. I mean, there are definitely things. I'm trying to think. When we started our website, we use like a WordPress variation now. Do you guys know school newspapers online?
Yeah.
So we use them, but when we started, I had a kid who knew how to code and knew how to, he basically built the website from scratch. And I don't know how to code. I know nothing about that. That's probably the one area that I probably need to know more about. But with school newspapers online, you don't really need to. But He wanted to do this. He wanted to build this site. It was fantastic when he did it. So I just ran with it and knew enough to, be dangerous and cause problems on the site. But, it's just something, I think it's a field that's changed so much. You have to be willing and to learn about what is coming or what's people are using. And obviously a lot of that is, we don't have the money or the budget that professional publications do or anything like that. But, you can do a lot with computers and a phone. And even if you don't have the high end things that you might have had at a professional publication.
Sure.
Absolutely.
I want to go back when you left St. Joe, and you worked for the Tribune newspaper chain, right?
When I left St. Joe, there's a group called the Copley newspapers.
Okay.
And I worked for 4 dailies on their design desk there. And then I went down to Florida to work at a paper there on their design desk. And then when I came back the second time to Chicago, I worked for Tribune Media Services. Yeah.
So what were all the various factors that made you want to teach?
Like I said, it was something I'd considered a little bit. I remember going back during my freshman year of college to see my advisor from high school, and I mentioned it to him, and I think he kind of laughed me off a little bit, and he definitely encouraged me to go into the field to learn it, and that was fantastic advice, because there's still stuff I use from what I learned as a professional journalist that I am able to call upon today. And a lot of it, I mean, the hours in media are just really wacky. And St. Joe, those were probably the most consistent hours I had until I got to the Trib. The other papers I was at, they were just kind of all over the place. And so that was just a frustrating thing. It didn't have anything to do with my love of journalism or the field or anything. It was just, it was just really hard to, have a life and a family as a journalist outside of the people who I was working with, which was great. They were great people who at every place I went to, I met and will still keep in touch with. And so, the people were fantastic, and they, and you know this from your experiences, you meet cool people. They're into the same things you are, so that's a really interesting and just motivational piece of it. But there a couple of the papers there. I mean, like I didn't know more than a week or two in advance, like what my weekend would be. They were just sort of all over the place with scheduling, and I mean, at the place in Florida, and the first time I was in Chicago, I was you get done at 1 a.m. or something. You don't everybody else more than likely that you are either related to or friends with is dead asleep at that time.
Yeah, they're working 8 to 5.
Right, and so you're sleeping while they're at work, and then you're probably leaving when they're coming in through the door. So it was just something that I just kind of with that got tired of it. And so the gig at the Trib was fantastic because it was normal hours, a little bit longer days because I was only working 4 days a week, and then that just let things be a little bit more normal, I suppose. And then moving into teaching, like I mentioned, it was something I'd considered in high school and in college. And my friend Aaron, like who I mentioned before, he was already doing this job at one of our other high schools here. And I was dating my wife at the time, and she lived in St. Louis, and so I was in Chicago. And so when I'd come down, I'd go visit Aaron and see his classroom and see what was going on. And after the first couple times I was there, I was like, I think this is something I'm really interested in doing. And so he was fantastic in helping me with that. I observed a lot in his classroom, and just started getting into it, and learning more about it and what I need to do. And the master's that I got was easy enough to, I wouldn't say it's easy. I mean, it's a master's degree, but with the way my life was organized at that point, it was easy enough to do, just in terms of the getting classwork done and things like that. And like I said, I'm with this, I'm still able to do all of the journalism that I was doing, or would be doing if I was still a journalist. So we're obviously not quite as, with our website, we're obviously, we update daily if we can. But obviously we're not updating, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times a day, like a professional website might be. But we're doing stuff on social media. And like I said, we try and update every day. And, we started podcasting this year. So we're really able to I'm able to take this in any direction I want, as long as the kids want to go along with it. I really try not to force them into doing things with our media that they're not interested in. As an example, I had a student come to me last semester, and we've generally done 2-3 minute segments for video stuff. You find out just telling an interesting story, not like a TV show or anything. And she got the bug to do that, and wanted to sort of start building a TV show. So that'll be hopefully premiering in the next week or two, because she had the interest and want, and annoyed me enough to, just let her do it. And then the same thing, it's the same student actually. We used to have like a literary magazine here, and I used to do that just because, again, I know publishing, not creative writing. But she wanted to do that. So I think once the TV thing gets off the ground, we'll probably bring that back. She started to do a little bit of the early legwork for that. But, so as long as the kids are interested and willing to put in the work and the time to do a good job with it, I'm more than happy to help them do that and figure it out, and figure out the ways that they're going to be successful and enjoy it. And people are going to want to look at it and read it. And, whether it's buying it like our yearbook, or, just taking a copy of the newspaper when we distribute them once a month, as long as they're able to do a good job and their best work, I'm happy to figure out to get how they can get to that point.
So the Lit Mag could come back?
I feel pretty confident it will.
So, what were some of the biggest changes and challenges to which you had to adjust when you were switching from a career in journalism to a career in teaching journalism?
That's a good question. I think one of the biggest things, and boy, I probably struggled with this for 4 or 5 years, and maybe a little bit less so now, but really struggled with it when I was first starting is, when you work in media, the programs you use or the just sort of, I guess, the level of the work is obviously at a professional level. And I'm not like, ripping on students or anything. It was just very difficult for me. It was very conscious for me to have to think about, oh, okay, why, like, this is a relatively simple concept in design or something, or Photoshop or something like that. Why aren't they getting this? Or why can't, like, I can, for a long time, it took me a long time to get out of the habit of doing something for a student,
Giving them the control.
right? Like, so it was, because I could just, I could knock in a couple of keys using the shortcuts, and bang, it would be, with a page designer or something, it would be something that I could fix quickly, which solved the problem in the short term, but in the long term it didn't do anything because I wasn't teaching them anything. They were, the problem was getting solved, but the next time it would come up, they'd still have to ask me. So it was difficult to go from working as a professional and sort of just recalibrating how you would teach something or work with other people, just because they're students, and this is something too that I just, they're younger than you are. They're not nearly as experienced as you are, and so and the other thing too is, like, here they have 6 other classes that they're going to every day,
Yeah.
and a lot of my students really love my classes and they enjoy being in here, but they still have 6 other classes that they're going to. So they have that other thing, whereas I can just be completely focused and dialed in on journalism and yearbook or newspaper or whatever it is I'm doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's important to remember.
I mean, you've built one of those programs now where you've had some success in national contests, state contests. How much emphasis do you put on stuff like that? How motivated are the kids by stuff like that?
Those are just a tough thing. I mean, I think they certainly are. Some of my top editors, they're always looking at things like, pacemakers, and for some of the things, like with NSPA's contests, they've done a really good job of making it a bit more efficient. And I think I've gotten more efficient with, I have a folder in Google Chrome where, when we have a link to something that is really, really strong, I just throw that in that folder. And the same thing on the desktop of my Mac. If we have a really great story or a really strong spread in the yearbook, I will just pop those, I'll make a PDF and put those in the folder, so that at least with that part, I don't have to spend the time locating it and finding it. As far as, the other stuff, I think it's, I use a lot of those, when they come out with their finalists or their individual awards, I use those in classes to, just for no other reason, to show them that, if they're whatever, 15, 16, 17, 18, it's possible for them to do really, really outstanding work. I use professional stuff all the time too, but I think the power of, NSPA or CSPA or whomever, state, local, whatever, is that you have just these examples of good work, and you can show that, you can show a student who maybe needs a little bit motivation or maybe not quite as confident, and show them that, hey, this is possible. You are capable of doing this stuff that is on a really, really high level. I think from, some other standpoints, it's good for publicity within your school. I think for the most part, students want to be associated with things that are, clubs or groups or teams or whatever that are good and positive. If they're teams, they're winning teams and things like that. I mean, everybody likes to be part of a winner. So that's nice. It's a motivational thing, and so it's a little bit of a recruiting thing, I guess, in that end of it. But it's certainly not something when I'm, if I'm when I'm recruiting students to my classes, I don't think I mentioned that we win awards. I know it's on our, we have applications they have to apply to join and things like that, but it's something that's there. But I really try not to be like, harping on it and things like that. I want people who they enjoy the things we do. And I try and pitch them that the experience is what is really interesting and compelling and what they're going to remember, because most of your classes, you're probably in the classroom and you're hanging out at a table or a desk, and a teacher has you doing something, whatever that might be, however interesting or entertaining you might find it. But here they get they get to choose what they're working on, for the most part. If they really like photography, or if they like to write, or if they're into design, I try to, it's not 100%, but I try to let them work on the things that they're most interested in. And so when I write or when I shoot photos, I want to do the same thing. I like to take photos of, sports and my kids and different other things that I find creatively satisfying. When I write, I like to write about the things that I'm passionate about. It makes it easier and more enjoyable than if I have to write about some book I read that I didn't really enjoy reading. To me, it's one of the good things about publications is sort of the choice that students are able to have and what they're working on. And then again, even taking that even further, there are occasionally times in my publications I will say, we really need to cover this. This is really something we should be thinking about. And I try to explain why, but, and my colleagues here, they'll send me story ideas for things all the time. And I tell them, this is a good idea. I'm interested in it. I said, but my students make the decisions on what we put into our yearbook or our newspaper or our website. And so they're 15, 16, 17, 18. They might not think what this is as interesting as you or I might think it's interesting, because they're teenagers and I'm 44. So there's a big difference there in what they're going to find interesting and what I'm going to find interesting. So, but I mean, there are things, we're like this year or this summer, I think our district is buying a fleet of buses, which is a big outlay of money now, but will more than likely save them lots of money in the long run, because they won't be at the whims of the bus companies to whatever they bid and things like that. So they'll be able to control all that, and they'll be able to budget much better for that. But that was something I suggested they report on, and they wound up doing it, because it is, and the thing you have to do is sometimes is just demonstrate to them, okay, probably 2/3 of our school gets bused to school. It affects a lot of people. People are going to be intrigued by it if there's different buses next year, and maybe they're going to be better quality or worse quality, or the drivers will be better or worse, or the routes will be different. All that stuff, it affects students.
Yeah.
Right.
So I guess I'm interested. What do you feel is the difference between being a good enough book and being a truly exceptional book? And I guess I mean this in kind of two different ways, because on the one hand, you guys are a truly exceptional book. You don't just settle for good enough. And yet there's also this part where it's a student publications, and sometimes you need to recognize when this is student work or you're close to deadline, and you have to realize what's good enough, and we just need to let this go. So what does that look like for you? What's the difference between the line between those two things?
That's a really good and difficult question. I try and reinforce to them that with yearbook, any of our publications, but I think a little bit more so with yearbook, is that it's a process. I get the sense this is true a little bit, but in their other classes, they probably will do 20 math problems and they turn it in, and then the teacher grades it and they get it back, and the process goes on. And the in other classes, that process is probably somewhat similar to that. And in here, they might write, like I'm a notorious pain in the butt on headlines. I'm upfront with them. I'm gonna tell you, you are not gonna get this right on the first try, and you might not get it right on the fifth try. Because and especially when it's their first spread or something like that, it's just the first time they're doing something, and so I want them to get as much feedback as they possibly can when it comes to things. I want to make sure that they're gaining confidence when they're doing that. And that just, when I write, it's a process. When I write an email, not, maybe something quick and short and like that I might just dash off really quick. But if I'm writing something a little bit longer, it never comes out right the first try, And so I just think with anything we do, with writing, with spread design, it might be minor adjustments, but chances are there's going to be, maybe we could just incorporate a little bit more, or we could make that photo a little bit bigger, or the headline just might need a little bit of tweaking. And so I think once they get past sort of the overall, the initial, I guess, shock, I wouldn't say it's that like a complete shock to the system, but just the fact that they're going to be expected to go back to a story and take a couple other passes at it, or maybe they need to go do another interview or work on that headline or subhead or whatever, they get used to it. But again, we also try and make it so that when they are sitting down to write a story, this isn't the first time that an editor's seen what they're doing, or when they're designing, we try and make it a bit more collaborative, so that it's not just, when I come over and tear a spread apart, it's not like this is the first time they're seeing something, or they've done it, or I've seen it, or their editor has seen it. There's usually been some communication. And then sort of, I guess, a little bit of the other part, getting from good enough to exceptional or good or great or whatever. I really think it's just a matter of the student knowing the amount of time and work that it takes to be really, really good. We tell, my wife and I tell our kids this, we want you to put in the effort to whatever it is you might do, whether it's your schoolwork, whether it's, my son plays soccer and baseball, my daughter swims, you're putting in this time, truly put in the time to work hard at it and get better at it. We're going to be happy and love we're going to love our children no matter what. But, we want them to learn that things don't just magically happen and get done. And it does require some work to get from good to better. And it's not going to just be this magical transformation overnight where it's going to, the good page, the good page design fairy is going to come and sprinkle something on it, and all of a sudden is an award-winning spread. It takes time. And I think something to do that, one way to encourage that or do that, I try and call that out when I see it in class. Or, my yearbook editor has been sitting in the room while we've been talking, and she just left about an hour and a half after school. And so I will say something. We have a long weekend, and I'm not going to be at school tomorrow, but on Tuesday, I'll say something about that, because that's how, a good book gets done. It's not the 50-minute class period. I mean, it is, but you can only do so much in a 50-minute class period. You can maybe knock out an interview or two, or, I could probably design a spread, not to sound completely arrogant, but, these guys, the students can't, and they probably shouldn't be able to do it in 50 minutes. they need time, and it needs to be a process. And I think, and I'm sure you guys have heard this too, one of the good things that or great things that publications provide to students is a pretty, if you're moving into some sort of professional field, you're going to have to work with other people. You're not going to get it right the first time. You're going to have to work with people who are different from you or who have different strengths than you. You're going to have to work with somebody who is going to tell you what to do, even though they're the same age as you or same grade as you or whatever. And so I think the big thing is really getting the students to buy into taking the time to make it as good as they possibly can. And so, like I said, when I see my editor again on Tuesday, I'll make sure to say, hey, I usually was here till 4:00 on Wednesday, really putting in a lot of time to get some stuff. I think she was just editing proofs, but getting that stuff done, because, I tell my editors that in class, their job is to attend to their staff, not to do their work. The expectations for an editor is a little bit higher than it is for a staff member.
Sure. Now, you mentioned, though, getting interviews done in a class period. But I did see in an Instagram post that you had mentioned that you guys do a lot of interviews on picture day and that you can get over 100 interviews done in a day. Tell us a little bit about how that works, because I think that's something that a lot of schools struggle with, getting those interviews and quotes and pictures and trying to get that all done in a class period.
It's sort of evolved. The teacher here who was here before me, I think they would usually do it on a half day, like their group photo day.
Mm-hmm.
And so they would cram in, into 4 hours, 50 groups or something like that. And when I took over for her, we kept doing that. And then the district got rid of half days, which was fine with me because that was like the one day of the year I kind of came to school cranky because I just knew like I was going to have to be like just a conductor and just, all right, you guys need to be here and ready to go. And just to get that number of people done in that period of time. And so we went to the full day thing. It kind of made it easier because we could take a little bit more time. And so about 3 or 4 years ago, we were just doing the groups and just taking the photos, and that was fine. And they would take the photos, we would get everybody on and off, get their names written down, all that stuff. And it was fine. But then I started thinking, and generally I would, that day I would take, my editors, 4 or 5 kids, and they would be like my helpers that day. Mm-hmm. They would run people in and off the bleachers to get the photos taken. I would sort of be the conductor telling them who's next and this is the rules and this is what we need to do. And I ran it by my principal, just like, hey, you mind if I make this like a full class field trip? It's obviously not a field trip because it's down to our gym, but it's so basically my entire yearbook staff comes, and now we still have those people who are organizing the people on the stage, but a couple of my photographers take the photos now. So we don't have to wait at all for any of the photos. We then have usually between 4 and 6 students interviewing people, and usually we'll just pull off like the officers of each club and just tell them, hey, we need you guys to go down there. And we just sort of have some, there's usually probably 1 or 2 questions relevant to our theme, trying to tie that in. And then we'll have a couple of questions just, so what is the big thing that, NHS has coming up this year, has already done, and they get to talk about that for a little while. And so, mm-hmm. And they're set up with laptops, and they're usually just typing it in as they're talking. We have, a couple other kids who are typing in the like row by row stuff. We'll take mug shots of those kids who are interviewing. Mm-hmm. We've got little like couple portable lights that we can, really cheap portable lights and a little backdrop that we can take. And it just has turned into we had all our club photos, and I think it was 7 or 8 spreads of that. we did that on a Tuesday in November, and I think a week later we had all those spreads done.
Wow.
It's just the way I sort of, I think, sold it to my principal was just that we're already taking these students out of here, we're already disrupting the day, and I get that, and I'm so thankful to our teachers who do not make too much of a stink about because you'll have some kids, there's always those handful of kids who are in 9 different clubs. They might not go to class for half of the day because they're down there a lot. And so, and I just said to my principal, I said, we're already doing this, they're already coming down here. I want to pull my kids out there, they get this cool experience, the staff does, but then we're just being much more productive. We're less intrusive into when we go to interview kids during class. This is just condensing it all in one day, and he bought into that, and he's been very supportive, not only of that, but of all of our publications. He's been fantastic. Yeah, it makes it a lot easier.
I read a story about you, and it was actually 4 other schools as well, I believe, but you guys helped develop a website for the U.S. women's sled hockey team.
Yeah.
Will you talk a little bit about that, what it involved, what skills the students utilized, and just how they rose to the challenge?
Yeah, that was something Kyle Carter, who is the yearbook advisor at Richland High School down in the Boot Heel, somehow got connected with the U.S. women's sled hockey team. And Kyle and I are both board members of MJEA, the Missouri Journalism Educators Association. And so, yeah, he threw that out to a handful of different advisors, just seeing if they were interested. And so I threw it out to my students. And yeah, it was a long weekend, Friday to Sunday. And the team was in Wentzville for a tournament they actually play against men's teams at this tournament. And so, yeah, they pretty much your basic journalism things that are going on. We built the website through school newspapers online, and they wrote stories, they were taking photographs, they shot video, edited that into packages and things like that, slideshows for the photography. I mean, yeah, it was just a lot that we did over the course of 2.5 really long days, but it was a really cool experience.
And how many students were involved in that?
I would say overall 25, 30, okay, something like that. I think I had maybe 6 or 7, and they weren't all, they were able to, if they were only available on Friday night, they could come in and work on Friday night. And there were quite a few who, we had enough photographers where, we might have had 5 or 6 cameras shooting the game, but we had enough photographers that they could sort of loop in and out. So they weren't shooting.
Right.
I think they played 4 games in the 2.5 days we were there. They didn't have to be at every single one. We had enough people. I think I was at every one. Kyle was at every one. And then we had like a headquarters back at Clayton High School. And so there was an advisor there who allowed the kids to be there to work and edit and things like that. So, and I think too, it was, the journalism experience was fantastic. But they also got to meet these athletes who have these really amazing stories, just from I don't know how many people were on the team. I probably would guess about 20 or so, but just amazing stories of just what they did or what they do, in service.
Some of their profiles, I mean, they were incredible.
Yeah, and there was just a variety. I think there were women on that team who were just a little bit, or it might have been some of the same ages as some of my students. I think there were a couple who were in high school, and then there were a couple who were probably closer to my age. And so it was just very, and it really, you could see it was affecting the students who got to participate in that, knew their journalism was having an impact. because the women on the team were so appreciative of them doing this, because their site was not attractive at all. It really did not have much to it. Mm-hmm. And not to say that it wasn't a lot of work, it was, but I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it's not terribly difficult these days to build a website. If you know what you're doing and you know journalism and it takes time, it's hard work, but building a website, you can jump on WordPress and get going, or wherever, any of those websites where you have free things, and you can put together a pretty good website. And like I said, the team and the women were just so appreciative of that, and I think that was one of the biggest impacts or benefits of that, was being able to see how much it meant to them to see this website. And I want to say Kyle told me a while ago that the men's team reached out to him to see if we'd be willing to do that. But I think it's been just a matter of, we just don't have the budget to travel around to where they might be at. I think the closest they were getting was like Philadelphia or something like that. And this was just something, it was happening in Missouri. I mean, where they were playing was 15 minutes from my house. So it was just a very much a confluence of, this is happening in this area. We've got, Missouri is a fantastic state for scholastic journalism. Evan mentioned, the conventions and things like that. Missouri is always has a ton of schools there. I mean, you would expect California or Texas or New York to have a ton of different programs there. But man, we always have a ton from Missouri, and they're all just outstanding programs.
Shout out to Missouri.
Yeah. And I think a big part of that is Mizzou, the University of Missouri. Just, it is quite a big, it's a magnet, and people know that it's a great school. And so, but yeah, Missouri always represents really well at those conferences.
Yeah. Well, Matt, this has been such an awesome conversation, and so much fun. I don't necessarily want to end this on like a serious or kind of a downer question, but I kind of wanted to ask a little bit about, like, when you recruit now. You talked about recruiting a little bit earlier, compared to, say 13, 14 years ago when you started. It's, journalism is in kind of a strange place, kind of in our society these days. Have you found that, maybe any attitudes have changed when you're out there recruiting kids? Like, you have to sell a little bit more or explain a little bit more, about the authenticity of journalism or the value of journalism when you're out there trying to get kids to join your program, as successful as it is?
Honestly, no. I think there's definitely been a change, but I've never actually, I've never had bigger numbers than I do now. So I think, sort of weirdly or perversely or something, it's been beneficial to high school journalism, and maybe a little bit at the college level, though I certainly can't speak to that. But I mean, I've read stories just saying J school enrollment's up. I have enough students in my publications in my introductory classes where there's another teacher here teaching one of those sections, because I can't teach 7 hours a day, nor do I want to teach 7 sections a day. Right. Which is fantastic. And I think it shows that there's interest not only in the field, but in our program. And I think it's because, we've talked about some things, we do good work. But I think one of the things too, I think is, and I mentioned to it before, I really try and play up choice when I'm recruiting, and that, we will try and let you do the things you want to do, and we'll cover the things that students are interested in. Another thing I play up when I'm recruiting, whether it's in, when I go into a classroom and talk about it, whether it's on our application, we've done some things online, this is a chance to have a voice as well in a pretty, I don't know, vocal's not the word I'm looking for, but with our media, whatever they are, you can, if you want to write an editorial about whatever, whether it's political or whether it's, something about our sports teams or our clubs or this topic or that topic, we can give you that voice, whether it's, like I said, an editorial or whether it's just merely reporting and shining light on this neat, interesting thing that happens. And I think that's really something that has resonated with kids. Whether, if you get into the politics of things, which certainly at that point, it's not something, when I'm recruiting, I definitely am not, saying, well, I'm pro this or pro that. Mm-hmm. But I do think it's important that students know that there are outlets for that there's ways they can get better at it, because, social media can be such a big, it's a voice, but it can be really hard. You can get, really lost in there, in terms of, will people hear what you're saying or see what you're doing or things like that? They might. But I think we've built a pretty good, platform for students to either cover the things that are important to them or report about the things or write about the things that are important to them. And so I don't think I would say that, we definitely, I think when we talk to students, honestly, about political things and cover political things, they're honestly probably a little bit more open in terms of talking about, the things that we might be covering with politics and things like that. I'm not really I can't really say I've seen, negative at our high school. I've seen a negative impact or anything like that, mm-hmm. Given how the media is perceived now. We try as I won't. We certainly do not shy away from covering difficult news or difficult topics. We've covered in the last year. We've covered suicide, and we've covered dealing with. We had a student who committed suicide about a year and a half ago, and we sort of covered some stuff in the aftermath of that, and we've covered, we've covered school safety and shootings and all that stuff. With the protests that were happening last year, like in the wake of Parkland, we covered that sort of stuff. And so, I think we've definitely benefited from students being a bit more aware that they can have a voice, and we're a pretty good outlet for that.
No one can argue that teachers are some of the most influential figures in a person's life, and you guys definitely don't receive the full recognition that you deserve. You don't go into it for the money. So right. I just really want to end saying thank you for what you do.
Thank you.
You know that you're teaching your students important life lessons that they're going to use for the rest of their life. They're going to represent journalism well, or whatever career that they go into. And we just want to thank you for what you do.
Great. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been outstanding. Thanks a lot for your time today, Matt.
Yeah, no problem.